It was one of those mornings when the house felt suffocating. Tola stared out the window, watching the sun rise above the neighborhood as if it had the power to brighten her own world. But everything around her was dark. The silence of the house felt heavy like a thick blanket that she couldn't escape, but still hoping that one day it would only get better. Her parents had already left for work, and her younger siblings, Folu and Tade, were still asleep, blissfully unaware of the weight Tola carried. The day was already beginning to take shape. A perfect storm was brewing in her heart. Mr. Badmus, a trusted family member, took advantage of her right on the living room floor. And after that day, it happened over and over again. But she couldn't tell anyone. She kept it all to herself. Her mother, Mrs. Shola, had always made it clear that Tola was somehow less than her other children. The reason Tola knew wasn't because she wasn't loved, but because she was a reminder of a past that Mrs. Shola wanted to bury. A past that has shaped every part of her mother's bitter nature. Mrs. Shola was just a girl when everything changed for her. She was only 16. She was full of dreams and ambition, but those dreams were cruelly shattered. One evening, when she was walking home from a part-time job, a man, an older man, someone who was supposed to protect her, had taken advantage of her. He was a family friend, someone her mother trusted. She was too young to understand. She was too naive to know the dangers of the world. It was the worst night of her life, and when she found out she was pregnant, it tore her apart. The shame, the guilt, and the endless disappointment in herself had consumed her. The life she had dreamed of was no longer possible. As the months passed, Mrs. Shola gave birth to Tola, but the child who came into this world was a constant reminder of her loss of innocence. She couldn't look at Tola without feeling anger towards the world. Every time she saw her daughter's face, she saw the face of the man who had destroyed her, and the bitterness grew. That bitterness shaped her treatment of Tola over the years. Cold, neglectful, and sometimes downright cruel. Tola was only 7 when she started to notice the difference. It wasn't just that her mother was distant. It was the way she treated her like a servant in her own home. While her younger siblings were pampered, allowed to lounge around, and enjoy the privileges of being the real children, Mrs. Shola would say, "Let my real children rest. They work too hard at school. After all, we know you only go to school to escape everything going on in your life." Miss Shola would brag about her 2 other kids, Tade, who is a boy, and Folu, who is a girl. She would say, "Tade, my son, would become a medical doctor, and Folu, a lawyer. I really don't care what you become, just do the chores." And Tola would reply with a sad face, "Mommy, I'm going to be successful too, and I'm going to make this family proud." And Mrs. Shola would nod and ignore her. Tola was the one who did all the chores. She washed the dishes, swept the floors, and did the laundry, all while her siblings played or watched TV. And when it came to school, Mrs. Shola didn't bother to ensure Tola had everything she needed to succeed. Tola had always been a smart and hardworking girl, but her mother never saw her potential. Instead, Mrs. Shola let her slip through the cracks. Her younger siblings were given the newest clothes, the latest gadgets, while Tola was lucky if she got a new pair of shoes each year. Don't expect too much from her. Mrs. Shola would often say, as though Tola was a burden. She's not like them. She's not my real daughter anyway. The words stung, each one like a deep cut that never fully healed. But there was one person in her life who had always shown her love, her stepfather, Mr. Shola. He came into their lives when Tola was about 12. Although he wasn't her biological father, he treated her like his own. He would take her out for ice cream, help her with her homework, and encourage her when she doubted herself. But Mr. Shola was always busy. He had a very demanding job, often traveling for work. So Tola would be left at home, trying to hold on to the fleeting moments of affection he gave to her. One night, after he has been away for a few weeks, he returned to find Tola looking downcast, exhausted from doing everything at home, while Mrs. Shola yelled at her for not doing enough. "Why do you treat my dear Tola this way? All chores should be shared equally, not overworking my Tola." And Mrs. Shola replied, "I will not fold my arms and let you spoil this girl." Mr. Shola said, "Tola should take a rest. Let Sade and Folu continue." But Tola insisted on doing the chores because she knows what awaits her once her dear father leaves for work. Tola looked into her father's eyes and said, "I don't know. I think it's because I'm a reminder of something she ate." Mr. Shola placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are not what happened to her. You are not to blame for her past. You are a strong, smart girl, and you deserve better than this." But despite his love, things didn't change. Mrs. Shola's cruelty continued. Her stepfather tried to intervene, but he wasn't home enough, and when he was, Mrs. Shola would mostly shut him down, insisting that she was doing what was best for her. Tola grew into a young, determined woman. She was determined to make something of herself despite the odds. She worked so hard. She studied late into the night and even picked up side jobs to cater for some of her needs. She had dreams, big ones, but her mother never saw them. She only saw her as the child who had destroyed her own life. Mr. Badmus came again to the house, and this time, Tola was older. She was more matured. She was 21. Mr. Badmus was at the door, asking to come inside. It was the same man who had taken advantage of her severally. Tola was alone in the house. She had already decided that she wasn't going to stay silent anymore. She couldn't take it anymore, not with everything she had endured. When Mr. Badmus knocked on the door, his smile didn't fool her. He had come back to finish what he had started years ago. As he pinned her to the couch, the same horror coursing through her veins as it had years ago. Tola struggled and screamed in her mind, but this time, Tola overpowered him. Tola gave him a mark, an unforgettable mark on his face. He quickly stood up, and on his way out, he said the usual thing. "This is our little secret. Tola, don't you dare tell anyone. And after all, you overpowered me today. I didn't succeed today. Another day, you won't be lucky like today." Tola felt her body go numb, the weight of her fear suffocating her. She laid on the couch for what felt like hours, unable to move or speak. And then, as the tears finally came, the door opened. Mrs. Shola walked in. Her mother saw her sitting on the floor, broken, crying. She tried as much as possible to ignore Tola, but Tola was determined to speak up on this day. She explained all that has been happening to her mother. Her mother rushed to her and slapped her across the face with all the force she could. And she said, "Don't want to hear anything from you." And Mrs. Shola hissed. "Don't you dare lie to me," Mrs. Shola said. What is this nonsense? What is this nonsense you're saying? Mr. Badmus is a family member. He's like our family member. As a matter of fact, he is a family friend. He would never do such a thing. You've seduced him, haven't you? You useless girl. You've done something to provoke him. Tola's heart shattered, and she said, Mom, please, I'm not lying. Mrs. Shola raised her hand again, silencing her. Shut up, you liar. You're nothing but trouble. Do you want to ruin our family's reputation? You're just like your father. You're so worthless and ungrateful. But despite her mother's words, Tola refused to back down. I'm not lying, Mom. He did this to me. But Mrs. Shola, always believing the worst of Tola, dismissed her. You will not speak of this again. If anyone finds out, I'm going to disown you. I swear it. And just like that, Mr. Badmus walked in like nothing had happened. As time went on, things only got worse for Tola. Mr. Badmus continued to visit the house with no remorse, free from any consequence, while Mrs. Shola treated her like a stranger, a burden. But despite the abuse and neglect, Tola found strength in the most unlikely place, herself. Tola couldn't bear it anymore. The neglect, the trauma. She moved out of the house and did all she could to fend for herself. She worked harder than ever, eventually earning a scholarship to a prestigious university in Ghana. And with time, she became successful in ways her mother could never have imagined. But no matter how much she achieved, the pain of the past lingered. She had built her own life, but it came with a price. Sadiq graduated from medical school, but still, after years and years of searching for a befitting job, he settled for a private hospital job where he was offered peanuts. Folu, on the other hand, failed law school. She had to resit for her exams. Mr. Shola retired, and the business he invested on crumbled in no time. Mr. and Mrs. Shola were in their old age and were also in debt. They were feeding from hand to mouth. One day, after years of silence, Tola received a letter from her mother, who is presently struggling with death and illness. And now, after years of bitterness, she was asking Tola for help. I know I was wrong, Mrs. Shola wrote, her words trembling with regret. I treated you poorly, and I can never take that back. I was hungry, hurt by things I couldn't control. But I see now. I see how strong you've become, how much I've hurt you. Please, Tola, forgive me. I don't deserve your help, but I don't have anyone else. Tola stood in front of the letter, her emotions tangled in knots. She thought about everything. She thought about the years of pain, about her stepfather's love, about the cruel things her mother had done to her. For the first time in a long time, Tola allowed herself to cry, not because of the pain, but because of the truth that had been buried so deep inside her. She had always longed for her mother's love, but the truth was she never received it. Do you think that Tola's mother was truly remorseful, or she was left with no choice because Tola is now successful? What would you do if you were in Tola's shoes? Kindly put down your comments in the comment section. I would like to read from you, and I also want to know where you are watching us from. Kindly remember to like the video, subscribe if you like what you just watched, and I'll see you in another video. With love, bye.